Broadcast live from the Middle East. It's Aaron Klein, Investigative Radio.
So much here that needs to be investigated. The media totally ignoring. And by the way, the same media that takes so much money from healthcare companies and drug companies, for some reason, after these mass shootings, never want to investigate anything possibly related to prescription drugs. And again, I know people listening take prescription drugs. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about whether in a tiny minority, studies, by the way, have shown for different drugs, I'm not going to mention any here, because there are a lot of them, that violent tendencies can happen. By the way, even for sleeping pills, a tiny segment. None of this is ever questioned. But let's get back to the media here, because they are also massively to blame. Maybe not for this shooting attack, maybe yes, we don't know, but certainly for fostering this environment of total lies and misinformation, and now actually essentially creating an environment where if you support the President of the United States, you're supporting mass murder. That is the insane delusional equation that they have made. And so if you're a contributor, let's say, and you give $500 to the president or his reelection campaign, and then let's say your neighbor finds out, or somebody in your community who believes this insanity, who believes that you are giving $500 to a mass murdering racist president who is advocating for the murder of fellow Americans, and specifically Americans of color. That's now what the insanity that the media, the same media, of course, that perpetuated a fabricated Russia hoax, is now pulling on the American public. And continuing with me right now is Joshua Klein of this radio show and of Breitbart. At Breitbart, we have been very carefully documenting the news media hype, lies, propaganda. I mean, to the point where we have this article that came out showing in the exact same day, the Washington Post, New York Times, both had front page stories less than 24 hours after the shooting, blaming Trump deceptively for the shooting, selectively editing the manifesto. And yet in these two stories that were not very long, we found 11 points in each of the two stories. Again, front page of the New York Times, front page of the Washington Post, 11 points where it's basically almost word for word copying, echoing each other on these talking points, and they're not plagiarizing. It's just that this is the left today. That you watch CNN, you watch MSNBC, you look at the Democrat talking points. They don't need to get their marching orders. They know exactly what to say at this point because it's the exact same template over and over again, and they're repeating it to the point where in just those two articles alone, again, front page of the New York Times and front page of the Washington Post, 18 hours after the shooting, 11 times the paragraphs totally mirror each other. And again, I don't think anybody from the New York Times called up the Washington Post or anyone from the Post called up the Times and said, hey, let's coordinate this. Let's point one, Donald Trump is a racist. Let's then say point two, we're connect him to the manifesto. I mean, we have very specific 11 instances of paragraphs that make the exact same points in both articles, and that's just two articles that we looked at. And again, they're not coordinating. I think that they just, this is their knee-jerk echo talking point agenda that they all know to put out without even talking to each other at this point. So the media has lost more than credibility here. We all know that they're not credible, but at this point they are inciting violence. Do you agree? Joshua Klein. Do you agree? Joshua Klein.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. And, I think this goes into some of what we talked about in the past couple of weeks, is that the media does not report the news. That is, they report narratives, and whatever reinforces and supports that narrative, which is usually, obviously, part of the Democratic media complex, anti-anything Republican, that is what fits into the news. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't get picked up. It's interesting during this same time period, literally this past weekend, and this happens every weekend, unfortunately, in major cities, but specifically there was a mass shooting of 7 people, 56 hurt. You don't hear a peep of that from the media because it does not fit their narrative, which is, and you were kind of kind in the way that you described the way that the media treats and talks about Donald Trump. It is way beyond that. I mean, this week, everything has been put on the table. They literally have called him, his administration, the rise of the Third Reich. They have called him literally the leader of the white supremacist movement, presidential quote-unquote candidates polling it between 0 and 1%. Beto O'Rourke / Robert Francis O'Rourke literally called him a avowed, white supremacist. I don't know when he took these vows. I mean, this is disgusting. Obviously, and besides the fact that his daughter is Jewish, his son-in-law is Jewish, his grandchildren are Jewish. I mean, this is nonsense, and this is rhetoric that is going to and has gotten people killed. And if it doesn't stop, I mean, this is going to be on a much larger scale. It has already begun, and it's insane. I mean, you have Andrea Mitchell. I can go on and on. You have Nicole Wallace, saying Trump wants to see the extermination of Latinos. You have this clown who was, I don't want to use the term analyst. He was known for his Russia analysis, which was 100% wrong. Malcolm Nance, claiming that, Trump is using some sort of mind control, sending subliminal messages to his white supremacist supporters to activate them. And the reason they have to go so far and stretch it to, subliminal messaging is because if there were real messaging, if there were real facts, then play them. That is the insanity of it all. If Trump is really this avowed white supremacist, for his whole life he's been believing, he's been involved in this movement, you would think that there would be hundreds of hours of, and he's done media and radio, obviously, and articles throughout his entire life. So you would think there would be tens of thousands of examples of showing how he's a white supremacist, but obviously there's not. So the media literally has to go that far to claim, it's mind melding, it's telepathic, it's subliminal, it's sick, it's disgusting, it's gotten people killed, and it's going to get more people killed. And I mean, these people are they're political animals. Their thirst is just for hunger. I mean, this is literally fascist behavior, and I'm disgusted and in shock that this is going on in the United States of America right now.
Yeah, instead what they're doing is, again, repeating the exact same lie, which is that at Charlottesville, where you did have, it was not a standoff between neo-Nazis on the one hand and Antifa on the other only. We met, in fact, the New York Times, by the way, reported the next day on average Americans who also just simply didn't want a Confederate monument to be taken down. And they even quoted one average American protester who went and said that it's a shame that the media only covered the neo-Nazis who were there because he was not part of the neo-Nazi movement. I met people who went there when we were in Alabama, and totally normal and different races, by the way, on both sides. So then the media ignored that. They pretended that there was only neo-Nazis on the one side, which there wasn't. There was also a huge contingent of just average Americans, and then on the other hand, just Antifa. And then he said that there are good people on both sides, referring, of course, they claim to the neo-Nazis. And then he disavows the neo-Nazis 1 second later and literally says, I'm not referring to the neo-Nazis. And that part is totally scrubbed out. And by the way, if Donald Trump really were talking about good people on both sides, the media has been lying again and claiming only one side is the neo-Nazis, nothing more, which is not true. And then only on the other side, Antifa, which they weren't the only ones there, not true. If the media equation was true, then actually he would be saying that there are good people on both sides. What's he saying? That there are good people also on Antifa? It makes no sense on any level. Now, we have watched in the past as people that I have known, like Steve Bannon, have been smeared as also a white supremacist, a white nationalist, anti-Semite, and yet he did a radio show for like 5-6 years, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. You would think there would be one clip in the entire time of all of his 3 hours a day on the radio. And trust me, as a radio host, you just talk. I don't have talking points. I don't have a script ever. I don't have a monologue ever. Believe you me, if somebody were racist, if they were anti-Semitic, if they were a white supremacist and they had a radio show, it would come out. Zero evidence. The exact opposite of zero evidence. They're making stuff up now about Trump and claiming, well, they know they don't have the tapes. They know they don't have, because it doesn't exist. They have no evidence, and so they claim it's telepathic. It's not really there, but he's doing it behind the scenes. This is going to lead to murder, more murder. This is going to lead to more violence, as you're saying. But actually, what about the dangers here of average American supporters of Trump, meaning most of the country at this point, a plurality certainly, they're now being doxxed. And if you support the president in any way, shape, or form, basically you're supporting mass murder, which is that not incitement against other Americans?
And I mean, that is their ultimate goal, is exactly that. That they're attempting to try and make Donald Trump so toxic that anyone that has anything to do with him, and we saw that with the doxing by Joaquin Castro, who was the brother of the loser candidate, Julian Castro, is also polling at, but probably even negative 1% at this point, literally listing the donors in the Texas area, 42 people. Right now we're seeing, calls of signs for, to boycott them. This is literally modeled after the BDS campaign. This is the same leftist tactics that they've used, obviously, against Israel. Now they're using it locally and nationally here. And yeah, the call is to anyone that is associated with Trump is going to pay a price this time. If you're a donor of his, we're coming after you. We're going to boycott your business. And beyond that, we might even kill you. Your life might even be in danger. I mean, we saw a demonstration a few days ago outside of the house of the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, and the rhetoric that was going on there was literally insane. They were calling to kill him. They were saying, I hope he falls down the steps and cracks his neck, and, the pain that he's in now should be the least of the pain that he should be in. It's gotten to a point where and that is what they are trying to do, is to literally make anyone that is pro-Trump equals you are a white supremacist. You need to be shamed. You need to be put in place. Hopefully when they think they're going to get power, you need to be re-educated. I mean, that is where the direction of the Democratic Party, that is where they have gone.
Yeah, and by the way, it's a total sign of desperation. They have no policies. They don't want us to talk about Donald Trump's policies. And so the only way that they think they can win here is if they smear everyone and everything as racist, anti-Semitic, but then even more than that, they need race riots. They need Americans ganging up one against the other, and that's what they think they can ride to 2020. But personally, I think they've got another thing coming. Stay tuned for more.
News Talk